The origins of the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel trace back to the slow unraveling of a once unified order whose foundations had been laid in the ashes of the Great War, and to understand how the soldiers, scribes, and paladins, who would eventually entomb themselves in the bunkers beneath Hidden Valley, came to inhabit the Mojave wasteland. One must look first to the culture and political atmosphere of Lost Hills at the turn of the 23rd century, where the Brotherhood's ideological rigidity and persistent reluctance to adapt to the new realities of the post-war world fostered both internal tension and external hostility. The Lost Hills leadership, still shaped by the legacy of the original Mariposa rebels and their determination to prevent advanced technology from falling into the hands of those they deemed unworthy or dangerous, maintained a worldview that placed technological preservation above political alliances, territorial expansion, or humanitarian outreach. Over time, this uncompromising philosophy bred friction between chapters that had grown more isolated and autonomous as the decades passed, and nowhere was that tension more pronounced than in the relationship between the Western leadership and the expanding new California Republic, whose democratic institutions, economic ambitions, and aggressive territorial claims clashed with the Brotherhood's insularity and determination to keep weapons, power armor, and energy research out of government hands. As the NCR blossomed from a cluster of small settlements into a structured republic with defined borders, a standing army, and an appetite for pre-war infrastructure, the Brotherhood found itself confronted with a nation that viewed technological development as a cornerstone of reconstruction, while the Brotherhood saw the same ambition as a pathway to another global catastrophe. Though the Brotherhood had once lent aid to communities across California during its earliest decades, by the time the NCR entered its period of rapid expansion, the Lost Hills elders had closed the Order's doors firmly, instructing its members to withdraw, consolidate, and protect their knowledge rather than share it. This mindset created a rift between the Brotherhood and the people who increasingly saw them as relics of an older age, hoarding abandoned technologies that could lift thousands from poverty. As NCR forces reclaimed old military bases and research facilities, their patrols and prospectors inevitably crossed paths, with Brotherhood patrols attempting to secure or recover anything classified as pre-war tech, and early confrontations, usually tense but non-violent, gradually escalated into skirmishes that eroded the possibility of peaceful coexistence. Among the paladins and knights stationed at Lost Hills, there was no consensus on how to deal with the rising Republic. Some saw the NCR as a useful stabilizing force, and believed that strict isolation would only lead to the Brotherhood's eventual marginalization, while others insisted that any concession would betray the Order's founding mission. As these disagreements deepened, several Brotherhood detachments were deployed across NCR territory to investigate lost research sites, monitor the Republic's expansion, and maintain a presence in contested regions. But the most consequential of these deployments was the one sent eastward into the Mojave, an area that had long been known for fragmented tribal communities, scattered military ruins, and the remnants of strategic installations such as HELIOS One. The Mojave expedition was intended not only to monitor potential threats, but also to secure advanced technology rumored to exist in the region, including energy research complexes, abandoned bunkers, and the infrastructure surrounding the Hoover Dam. The decision to establish a permanent chapter there was rooted in both opportunity and necessity. The Lost Hills Council saw the Mojave as a buffer between the Brotherhood and the increasingly assertive NCR, and they believed that a strong outpost in the region could allow the Order to reclaim valuable technology while maintaining strategic distance from the Republic's growing influence. At the same time, younger Brotherhood members disillusioned with Lost Hills politics viewed the Mojave as a chance to rebuild the Order's relevance, believing that a new chapter free from entrenched leadership might revive the Brotherhood's original spirit of disciplined purpose. Thus, over a series of carefully planned deployments, paladins, knights, and scribes migrated east, carrying with them the traditions, protocols, and prejudices of their parent organization. Upon arrival, they discovered a land geographically vast, sparsely populated, and full of promise, but one that was also fraught with the challenges posed by raiders, hostile wildlife, unpredictable weather, and fractured local tribes struggling to survive. The early Mojave Brotherhood established its first temporary positions in defensible ruins scattered around the region before ultimately selecting Hidden Valley as the site of their primary bunker system. This location was chosen due to its isolation, its acoustic shielding properties, the natural protection of its surrounding cliffs, and its close proximity to several pre-war military installations that the chapter intended to study or secure. At first, the Brotherhood believed they could operate quietly and efficiently in the Mojave without drawing attention, but the moment the NCR extended its influence into the region, constructing outposts, raising supply lines, and securing Hoover Dam, the chapter's leadership realized that the old tensions from California had followed them east. The NCR, eager to protect its supply chain and ensure future prosperity through the power generated at the dam, viewed the Brotherhood's presence as a volatile liability, while the Brotherhood saw the NCR's large military footprint as a prelude to expansionist dominance. Early interactions between NCR patrols and Brotherhood scouts were cautious, yet charged with underlying distrust. The Brotherhood was accustomed to taking control of any pre-war installation it deemed valuable, and the NCR, driven by the needs of a growing population, was unwilling to relinquish sites such as Helios One. These encounters foreshadowed the conflict that would eventually devastate the Mojave chapter. Meanwhile, back at Lost Hills, the elders remained divided about how to handle the NCR, and their indecision left the Mojave contingent without clear guidance. As months passed, the Mojave chapter became increasingly self-reliant, evolving its own internal culture shaped by the stresses of operating in a hostile, contested environment. Members hardened quickly, developing a more survival-oriented mindset than their Californian counterparts. Yet, with autonomy came risk. Without strong ties to Lost Hills, the Mojave chapter found itself stranded between two powerful forces, one ideological and one political. Still, the Brotherhood believed that securing the Mojave's technological heritage was vital to their mission, and they entrusted their newly appointed elder, eventually Father Elijah, a man whose brilliance and obsession would later nearly destroy them, to lead the chapter with an unwavering mandate to prevent advanced weaponry from falling into NCR hands. Elijah's leadership, marked by secrecy and an uncompromising pursuit of pre-war technology, drove the chapter deeper into the Mojave's ruins and set the stage for the catastrophic battle that would define their fate. Under Elijah's command, the Brotherhood adopted increasingly aggressive scavenging operations, which further antagonized the NCR, who viewed such actions as theft from the Republic's future citizens. Hidden Valley, once envisioned as a strategic refuge, became a symbol of the Brotherhood's withdrawal from diplomacy and its descent into isolation. Still, despite growing tensions, The chapter's early years in the Mojave were defined by determination and a belief that they could prove their relevance by securing technological knowledge in a world that seemed always on the brink of repeating its mistakes. However, the reality of the Mojave's complex political landscape, combined with the NCR's rapid militarization and Elijah's unpredictable strategies, would soon shatter any illusions of stability. By the time the NCR fully committed to controlling the region, the Brotherhood's presence had become untenable, and the events that would ultimately lead to the disaster at HELIOS One began to unfold. Thus, the Mojave chapter's origins, born from the ideological rigidity of Lost Hills, the opportunistic promise of the Mojave, and the escalating tensions with the NCR, set the stage for a conflict that would define the chapter's identity for decades to come, ultimately driving them into the sealed isolation of Hidden Valley and marking the beginning of their long struggle for survival. The geopolitical pressure that would eventually drive the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel into open conflict with the new California Republic began long before the first shot was fired at HELIOS One, taking root instead in the slow, grinding competition for territory, resources, and ideological dominance that unfolded as the Republic pushed eastward into Nevada, establishing military and civilian infrastructure that gradually encircled the Brotherhood's positions and cast an ever-expanding shadow over Hidden Valley and its surrounding patrol routes, a shadow that grew darker and more oppressive with each NCR campaign, each fortified outpost, and each strategic decision made by the Republic's High Command as they sought to secure the Mojave and protect the supply lines that flowed to and from Hoover Dam. To understand how tensions escalated to the point of inevitable war, one must examine the NCR's Bitter Springs campaign, a military action intended to quell raider tribes, but which became a symbol of both the Republic's aggressive expansionism and the collateral destruction that accompanied its efforts to bring order to the wasteland. Although the Brotherhood of Steel played no direct role in the Bitter Springs massacre, its consequences reshaped the entire region. Because the NCR's increased militarization of the eastern Mojave, motivated by a desire to strengthen control over its borders, prevent tribal uprisings, and secure pathways to the dam, brought its soldiers, rangers, and engineers dangerously close to Brotherhood patrol zones. As NCR forces established fortified checkpoints, outposts, and logistical hubs, especially those protecting the Bitter Springs supply route, the Brotherhood watched from the shadows, interpreting every new NCR position as a sign that the Republic intended to push them aside and claim control over any technological resources within reach. Meanwhile, within NCR command circles, the Brotherhood's well-armed patrols, advanced power armor units, and clandestine operations were viewed with growing suspicion, exacerbated by reports from Ranger detachments of Brotherhood soldiers seizing classified equipment, intercepting convoys, or placing warning markers around old research facilities the Republic hoped to refurbish. The Bitter Springs incident further hardened NCR attitudes, driving the Republic to regard any armed, non-affiliated faction as a potential threat to civilian safety, and this perception extended naturally to the Brotherhood, whose secrecy and refusal to cooperate with Republic authorities made them appear, in the eyes of NCR lawmakers and generals, as renegades obstructing the greater project of rebuilding civilization. As ranger stations rose along the Bitter Springs line, small, heavily armed outposts manned by elite troops with orders to monitor and neutralize destabilizing threats, the Brotherhood found its patrol routes increasingly constrained, forcing them to take longer, more dangerous paths around NCR territory. These rerouted operations not only created hazards for Brotherhood scouts who had to navigate through Cazador territory, Night Stalker habitats, and Raider-held passes, but also strained the chapter's already limited resources, because detours meant higher energy weapon usage, increased armor degradation, and more exposure to hostile wildlife. As the NCR expanded eastward, the network of settlements and supply lines that supported the Republic brought an influx of settlers, caravan companies, engineers, and military personnel into the Mojave, fundamentally altering the region's balance of power. What had once been open desert patrolled quietly by scattered Brotherhood teams gradually became a corridor of NCR authority, policed by rangers who were both respected and feared for their efficiency. The Republic's acquisition of strategic locations, most notably Hoover Dam, shifted its priorities towards securing energy infrastructure. And when NCR engineers began evaluating Helios One as a potential power source for California and the growing Mojave territory, the Brotherhood saw this as an intolerable threat, given that the facility contained high-level pre-war research that fell squarely within the Brotherhood's mandate. The NCR, for its part, interpreted Brotherhood attempts to restrict access to Helios One as territorial aggression from an outdated militaristic order unwilling to adapt to post-war societal needs. Bitter Springs, although directly concerning tribal populations rather than the Brotherhood, set a precedent. The NCR was willing to deploy overwhelming force to maintain stability along its crucial eastern routes, and its leadership saw any faction unwilling to submit to the Republic's authority as a destabilizing element. This mindset was reinforced by similar incidents involving raiders, rogue mercenary groups, and displaced tribes, all of whom challenged NCR expansion in one way or another. To NCR strategists, the Brotherhood's refusal to negotiate openly or share information about their activities placed them in the same category as other regional threats, even though the Brotherhood's intentions were rooted in technological preservation rather than conquest. The Republic, however, could not tolerate a heavily armed, secretive group lying beyond its command structure, especially one equipped with power armor, laser rifles, and a rigid ideology that opposed the distribution of pre-war technology to civilian governments. While NCR leadership debated how to handle the Brotherhood, the Rangers on the ground increasingly viewed the Order as a hostile power, especially after several incidents in which Brotherhood patrols disabled NCR scouting equipment or issued stern warnings to keep away from pre-war ruins. These tensions escalated further when the Brotherhood, eager to secure more resources, began expanding its operations around the Mojave in spite of the NCR presence. Paladins and Knights conducted reconnaissance missions in areas the NCR considered critical security zones, and while these operations were not intentionally provocative, they heightened fears within NCR command that the Brotherhood might launch preemptive strikes to secure technological sites before the Republic could claim them. Meanwhile, inside Hidden Valley, the Elders debated how to respond to the NCR's tightening grip on the region. Some insisted that the Brotherhood could not compromise on its foundational principles, believing that sharing technology with governments, even stable ones like the NCR, was tantamount to inviting another global catastrophe. Others argued that the NCR's influence was too great to ignore, and that limited cooperation might prevent disaster. Yet the Bitter Springs aftermath cast a deep psychological shadow over both sides. The NCR emerged from the incident with a hardened stance toward any potential threat, and its command structure became increasingly dominated by officers who prioritized security over diplomacy. The Brotherhood watched the massacre from afar, concluding that the Republic's capacity for large-scale violence could someday be turned against them. In this climate of mutual suspicion, even routine NCR patrols near Brotherhood territory were interpreted as reconnaissance for future assaults, while NCR soldiers reported sightings of armored figures, observing them from canyon ridges or the edges of pre-war ruins, reinforcing the Republic's belief that the Brotherhood was preparing for conflict. The geography of the Mojave further funneled both factions into competition. The Bitter Springs route was one of the most critical supply lines feeding the NCR's eastern campaign, and since it connected to broader networks stretching toward the dam, the Republic considered it non-negotiable. However, the Brotherhood's preferred patrol paths and scouting trails frequently overlapped with these routes, because many passed through terrain rich in old military equipment. This geographical overlap created a constant risk of confrontation, and even when encounters ended peacefully, the accumulated hostility made further incidents inevitable. The NCR presence at Camp McCarran, combined with scattered ranger stations across the desert, formed a web of observation that made it increasingly difficult for the Brotherhood to move without detection. Paladins adapted by shifting patrols to nighttime hours, but darkness brought its own dangers, and several valuable nights were lost to wildlife or ambushes. As losses mounted, the Brotherhood developed a growing resentment toward the NCR, blaming its expansion for the dangers that now plagued their operations. At the same time, the Republic's military commanders grew weary of issuing warnings to their units about potential Brotherhood sightings, viewing these armored figures as an unnecessary drain on attention and resources. The conflict was not simply one of territory, but of ideology. The NCR believed in reconstruction through democratic governance, infrastructure development, and controlled access to advanced technology, while the Brotherhood believed in containment, restriction, and the careful safeguarding of knowledge. These worldviews were fundamentally incompatible, and the Bitter Springs militarization only accelerated their collision. To NCR policymakers, the Mojave chapter was a rogue element obstructing the Republic's mission to bring stability and prosperity to the wasteland. To the Brotherhood's leadership, the NCR represented a reckless, overconfident nation-state determined to monopolize the tools that had destroyed the old world. The closer the NCR moved toward HELIOS One and Hidden Valley, the more certain the Brotherhood became that war was unavoidable. And so, as the NCR constructed the Bitter Springs line of fortifications, ranger stations, and supply chains, the Mojave Brotherhood shifted deeper into a defensive posture, readying itself for conflict even as it struggled with internal disagreements and resource shortages. The shadow of the NCR grew long across the desert, and with each passing season, the fragile equilibrium between the two factions eroded further, setting the stage for a catastrophic confrontation that neither side fully desired, yet neither could prevent. The decision by the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel to go to war with the new California Republic did not emerge from a single moment of confrontation, but rather from a long chain of miscalculations, ideological rigidity, and the slow erosion of diplomatic possibility as both factions misread each other's intentions, clung to outdated doctrines, and hardened their positions with every passing month, turning a tense regional standoff into an inevitable conflict shaped by the ghosts of the past and the fears of the future. Within the Hidden Valley bunker, the seeds of war took root in the beliefs of an organization that had built its identity around the preservation of technology and the prevention of another global cataclysm, a mission so deeply ingrained in Brotherhood culture that even the slightest deviation from it was viewed as betrayal. This doctrinal stagnation had been growing since the early days after the Great War, as the Brotherhood transformed from a small group of Mariposa survivors determined to rebuild knowledge into an inward-facing technocratic order, convinced that only rigid control over advanced technology could prevent humanity from repeating its mistakes. By the time the Mojave chapter was established, this doctrine had calcified into something almost sacred, leaving its leadership unable to conceive of a world in which technology could be shared, regulated, or democratically managed, rather than guarded by elite warrior monks. When the NCR began expanding east, the Brotherhood interpreted its campaigns not as efforts to stabilize the region, but as harbingers of a dangerous, technologically empowered government that would inevitably lead society back to the brink of annihilation. This fear was amplified by the personality and worldview of Elder Elijah, the brilliant yet unstable mathematician turned strategist, who believed with absolute conviction that the Brotherhood must reclaim or destroy all advanced technology in the Mojave before the NCR could exploit it. Elijah saw the Republic as a threat that would only grow stronger over time, and he became increasingly obsessed with seizing control of pre-war facilities, especially energy research sites such as HELIOS One, which he viewed as essential to the Brotherhood mission. His rhetoric, delivered in long, impassioned briefings to his paladins and scribes, framed the NCR as a politically naive, resource-hungry state whose leaders lacked the restraint and philosophical discipline necessary to wield pre-war power responsibly. Although many members of the Brotherhood admired Elijah's intellect and decisiveness, others grew concerned that his focus on high-risk operations, combined with his disregard for diplomacy, would draw them into a war they could not win. Nevertheless, Elijah's influence over the chapter was strong, and his warnings about the NCR found fertile ground among knights and paladins who had spent months encountering NCR expansion firsthand. The Republic's constant presence near Brotherhood territory reinforced the belief that the NCR intended to absorb or eliminate them, even though the NCR leadership at the time viewed the Brotherhood as a nuisance rather than an existential threat. However, misinterpretation defined the early interactions between both factions. When NCR patrols scouted areas near HELIOS One, they did so for logistical and engineering assessments, yet the Brotherhood interpreted these patrols as precursors to military seizure. When Brotherhood scouts investigated NCR outposts to evaluate their weaponry and defensive capabilities, the NCR saw them as covert reconnaissance missions preparing for attack. This cycle of mistrust fed into the long-standing doctrinal habits of the Brotherhood, whose leadership approached all political interactions with suspicion, having spent decades believing that no government could be trusted with pre-war technology. Their stance, reinforced by the trauma of the Great War, and later encounters with dangerous technologies in the core region, convinced them that technological stewardship could never be entrusted to democratic institutions, which were, in their view, susceptible to corruption, incompetence, or panic. As a result, the Brotherhood made no serious attempt to open negotiations with the NCR, even though the NCR might have been willing to consider limited agreements regarding access to research sites or shared security protocols. The Brotherhood's unwavering insistence on total control made such compromise impossible. Inside the bunker, debates raged between hardliners who believed war was inevitable and moderates who believed the Brotherhood should avoid confrontation. Yet, even the moderates, shaped by decades of strict ideological training, struggled to imagine diplomatic solutions. Their reservations centered not on whether the NCR should be confronted, but rather on the timing and tactics. No one within the hierarchy could envision a strategy that deviated from the old pattern. Identify advanced technology, secure it, and neutralize anyone who threatened that objective. Meanwhile, the NCR, its military expanding rapidly, its rangers operating with increasing autonomy, and its leadership focused on consolidating control over the Mojave, perceived the Brotherhood as a secretive, heavily armed militia refusing to recognize legitimate authority. Several NCR officers viewed the Brotherhood as outdated but dangerous, while others believed the Brotherhood's presence at sites like Helios One deprived the Republic of critical infrastructure needed to support its growing population. Though the NCR was not yet committed to war, its internal view of the Brotherhood shifted from cautious tolerance to strategic concern. And this shift hardened further after several incidents in which Brotherhood patrols confiscated equipment from NCR prospectors or intercepted construction teams attempting to evaluate pre-war facilities. Each faction saw itself as defensive and the other as expansionist, and with every interaction, the gulf widened. The turning point came when Elijah, obsessed with securing Helios One before the NCR could fully occupy the area, presented a plan to launch a preemptive strike to seize total control of the facility. He argued that the Brotherhood must act decisively to prevent the NCR from harnessing the power of the sun through the Archimedes system, even though the Brotherhood lacked technical certainty about how the system worked and whether it could be safely operated. Elijah's plan was bold, but it was also based on incomplete data and an overestimation of the Brotherhood's strength. The Mojave chapter simply did not possess the manpower, logistical support, or political alliances needed to maintain control of a major energy installation in a region increasingly dominated by NCR troops. Yet Elijah believed that desperation, secrecy, and superior technology would allow them to prevail. In this calculation, he failed to understand that the NCR, unlike the fragmented raiders and small factions the Brotherhood had dealt with in the past, possessed a vast reserve of soldiers, engineers, supply caravans, and support infrastructure. They could not be intimidated or outmaneuvered through small unit superiority alone. When Elijah insisted on occupying Helios One and fortifying it with his best paladins, he did so with the belief that the Brotherhood could fend off NCR counterattacks long enough to uncover and potentially activate the full defensive capabilities of the Archimedes arrays. His plan hinged on the assumption that the NCR would hesitate to commit large forces to an assault, fearing the possibility of the Brotherhood using the facility's experimental weapon systems. In reality, the NCR saw the Brotherhood occupation as an intolerable disruption to its regional stability efforts, and the Republic began preparing a military response almost immediately. Elijah's decision created an irreversible divergence between the Mojave Brotherhood and the NCR. It represented the culmination of all the chapter's strategic misjudgments, an outdated belief in small-scale elite tactics, a complete misunderstanding of NCR political will, and a refusal to adapt to a changing world where technology could no longer be controlled by a single isolated order. Even after Elijah's eventual disappearance, when he fled Helios One during the NCR assault, and abandoned his soldiers to their fate, the doctrinal damage had already been done. The chapter's new leadership, shaken by Elijah's failure but still deeply committed to traditional Brotherhood values, attempted to salvage the situation through defensive entrenchment rather than diplomacy. Elder McNamara inherited a chapter devastated by the loss at Helios One. But instead of reconsidering the Brotherhood's approach to the NCR, he doubled down on secrecy and isolation, convinced that recovery was impossible if the NCR was permitted any access to advanced technology. The loss of Elijah also fractured the chapter internally, as some paladins viewed him as a visionary undone by bad luck, while others saw him as a reckless despot whose ambitions led to unnecessary bloodshed. Yet even those who criticized Elijah refused to reject his central claim, that the NCR could not be trusted with technological power. Thus, the Mojave Brotherhood found itself locked into a self-reinforcing cycle of fear, isolation, and hostility, unable to alter course even as its numbers dwindled and its strategic options collapsed. Doctrinal stagnation prevented the Brotherhood from recognizing that the NCR, though imperfect, was not a militaristic dictatorship seeking to hoard technology for destructive purposes, but rather a sprawling, bureaucratic nation struggling to manage rapid growth. The Brotherhood's refusal to engage constructively with this new reality stemmed from a worldview frozen in pre-war trauma and reinforced through generations of insular training. As a result, the Mojave Brotherhood made every decision as though the world had not changed at all, as though every government were destined to become another United States, and every scientific breakthrough another step toward atomic fire. War became a self-fulfilling prophecy, born not from a desire for conquest, but from an inability to reimagine the Brotherhood's place in a world where power was shifting away from small, isolated factions toward large, interconnected societies. By the time the NCR launched its full-scale assault on HELIOS One, the Brotherhood's fate had been sealed by decades of rigid ideology, leadership instability, and strategic blindness. They had convinced themselves that only war could preserve their mission, even though war would ultimately destroy nearly everything they hoped to protect, and thus the Mojave Brotherhood marched toward its greatest defeat on a path built not of aggression, but of misunderstanding, fear, and the tragic weight of a doctrine that could no longer sustain itself in the world the NCR was building. The Battle of HELIOS One stands as the defining catastrophe in the history of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, a moment when doctrinal rigidity, strategic miscalculation, and the unstoppable momentum of the new California Republic collided amid the sun-scorched concrete foundations of a pre-war solar energy complex that neither faction fully understood, yet both believed they could control. And to understand how the Brotherhood's fortunes collapsed so completely on that unforgiving day, one must retrace the sequence of events that led Elder Elijah and his most elite paladins into a battle they were not prepared to win, fought against an enemy whose resources, manpower, and logistical strength far surpassed anything the Brotherhood had ever faced in the Mojave. HELIOS One, formerly known as the Poseidon Energy Concentrated Solar Array and Research Facility, was one of the most sophisticated renewable energy sites constructed before the Great War, a place where advanced photovoltaic research, military applications, and classified power transmission experiments converged under the Archimedes Initiative, and its existence alone made it irresistible to the Brotherhood, who viewed it as a treasure trove of advanced technology that needed to be sealed away from any government whose ambitions threatened to repeat the sins of the Old World. Elder Elijah, obsessed with recovering the secrets hidden within the complex, believed that control of HELIOS One would give the Brotherhood a strategic advantage in its struggle to assert technological stewardship over the Mojave, and he convinced his senior paladins that occupation of the site was not merely a defensive maneuver, but a decisive strike that would secure the chapter's future. The NCR saw HELIOS One in entirely different terms. To them, it was a potential source of energy capable of fueling agricultural recovery, supporting military infrastructure, and providing electricity to a region struggling to rebuild. and when NCR survey teams first approached the complex, they found it occupied by a Brotherhood detachment clad in power armor, armed with energy weapons, and determined to hold the site at all costs. Initial exchanges between the two sides were tense but not immediately violent. NCR engineers requested access to the facility, hoping to evaluate its viability, and the Brotherhood flatly refused, citing their mandate to secure dangerous technology. From that point onward, the NCR viewed the Brotherhood occupation of HELIOS One as a direct threat to regional stability, especially given rumors that the Archimedes arrays might have weaponized applications. Ranger Command, aware of the facility's potential, began urging the NCR General Staff to authorize an operation to reclaim the site, arguing that allowing the Brotherhood to maintain control over a potentially devastating energy weapon would jeopardize the Republic's hold on Hoover Dam and the surrounding Mojave. Meanwhile, inside HELIOS One, Elder Elijah initiated an obsessive survey of the structure, demanding that his scribes and technicians scour every terminal, conduit, and control module for clues regarding the Archimedes project. His fixation on unlocking the site's secrets led him to overestimate the Brotherhood's ability to hold the complex, especially given the limited defensive positions, the open terrain surrounding the array, and the fact that the NCR could easily mobilize far larger forces. Elijah's confidence bordered on delusion, fueled by a belief that the Brotherhood's superior training, discipline, and equipment could compensate for their smaller numbers. His paladins, hardened veterans who revered Elijah's intellect, followed his orders without hesitation, constructing makeshift fortifications, establishing firing lanes, and preparing to repel what they assumed would be a series of probing NCR attacks. What they did not anticipate was the scale and speed of the NCR's response. Once the NCR resolved to reclaim HELIOS One, its military assembled a coordinated force consisting of infantry battalions, ranger detachments, engineers, and logistical support units drawn from Camp McCarran and other regional outposts, creating a combined arms operation unlike anything the Mojave Brotherhood had anticipated. The NCR's numerical superiority was overwhelming. Dozens of soldiers for every paladin, supply caravans bringing fresh ammunition and medical support, and ranger sharpshooters positioned along ridges overlooking the complex. As NCR forces approached, Brotherhood scouts reported alarming troop movements, but Elijah refused to abandon his position, convinced that an orderly withdrawal would doom the chapter's long-term mission. His arrogance proved fatal. The opening salvo of the battle began at dawn, when NCR artillery units launched a series of targeted shelling strikes against Brotherhood defensive positions, using intelligence gathered from months of reconnaissance to pinpoint likely fortifications. Though the Brotherhood had reinforced several key entrances and established firing lines supported by laser and plasma weapons, their defenses were not built to withstand sustained artillery bombardment. Several paladins were killed instantly, their power armor torn apart by explosive impacts, and the initial shock of the assault forced the Brotherhood to retreat deeper into the facility. Elijah, recognizing too late that the NCR assault was far more substantial than he had predicted, attempted to reorganize his forces, but communication lines inside the complex were chaotic, riddled with interference from damaged systems and structural vibrations caused by the bombardment. NCR infantry advanced behind the artillery barrage, moving in tight formations supported by ranger marksmen who eliminated Brotherhood knights attempting to relocate to better vantage points. The NCR infantry, armed with service rifles, grenade launchers, and heavy weapons, pushed steadily across the open desert, their movements coordinated with precision and supported by engineers who neutralized mines and razor wire barriers laid by the Brotherhood. For every NCR soldier struck down by laser fire, 3 more pushed forward, and while Brotherhood paladins inflicted heavy casualties during the first hours of the assault, the Republic's reserves and supply chains allowed it to absorb losses in a way the Brotherhood could not. The battle's turning point came when NCR forces breached the primary western entrance of HELIOS One. A squad of Ranger veterans, led by decorated officers familiar with Brotherhood tactics, managed to flank a key firing position by navigating through a drainage culvert exposed by months of scouting. They emerged behind several paladins who were holding their ground against an advancing NCR column, catching them off guard and eliminating them in a close-quarters firefight. Once the paladins fell, NCR forces poured into the breach, overwhelming the defenders inside. Desperate Brotherhood knights attempted to seal off corridors and establish fallback positions, but the labyrinthine layout of HELIOS One worked against them. The facility, designed for civilian and scientific use rather than military fortification, offered limited choke points and too many exposed, open spaces. Elijah, realizing the battle was slipping out of his control, retreated deeper into the research wings, issuing frantic orders for his scribes to secure any data they could salvage. But his panic infected the entire Brotherhood defense. Paladins loyal to him attempted to mount counterattacks, yet they lacked coordination, and NCR forces, supported by medics and constant resupply, pressed relentlessly forward. The sounds of heavy gunfire, ricocheting energy bolts, and collapsing structures echoed throughout the facility as Brotherhood units were slowly pushed back. In one of the most tragic moments of the battle, a squad of Brotherhood knights attempted to hold the central observation deck, believing it offered the best remaining vantage point for laser fire, but the NCR brought in heavy machine guns and suppressed the defenders until they were forced to abandon the position or be killed. The Brotherhood's last stand unfolded in the deepest sections of the complex, where Elder Elijah, realizing that complete defeat was inevitable, made the fateful decision to flee. Without warning his paladins or issuing an evacuation order, Elijah abandoned his soldiers, escaping through an emergency maintenance tunnel and disappearing into the Mojave. His departure shattered the chain of command, leaving the remaining Brotherhood forces leaderless at the moment they needed direction most. Some paladins assumed he had been killed and attempted to regroup. Others believed he had fled and tried to escape in small squads. Still, others held their ground out of loyalty to the Brotherhood's mission, choosing to fight to the end. The NCR, unaware of Elijah's escape, continued its methodical advance through the facility, clearing rooms, neutralizing pockets of resistance, and securing control over key terminals and research equipment. By midday, the battle was effectively over. The last organized Brotherhood defense collapsed under the combined pressure of NCR infantry, Ranger sharpshooters, and engineers who secured the final sections of the complex. A handful of Brotherhood survivors managed to escape into the desert, retreating toward Hidden Valley with news of Elijah's disappearance and the catastrophic losses suffered at HELIOS One. The NCR's victory, though costly, was decisive. The Republic had not only reclaimed a critical energy asset but had also crippled the Mojave Brotherhood, killing many of its most experienced paladins and stripping the chapter of any realistic ability to mount future large-scale operations. The psychological impact of the defeat was devastating. When the surviving Brotherhood members returned to Hidden Valley, they were met with shock, disbelief, and despair. The paladins who returned were physically wounded and emotionally scarred, haunted by the memory of Elijah's abandonment and the overwhelming force of the NCR. Elder McNamara, forced to assume leadership in the aftermath, faced an impossible task: rebuild a chapter that had been shattered, preserve morale among survivors, and prepare for the possibility that the NCR might soon launch an assault on Hidden Valley itself. For the NCR, the Battle of HELIOS One marked the moment when the Brotherhood ceased to be a strategic threat and became instead a dangerous but diminished faction, forced into hiding. Although the NCR would later secure the facility and attempt to reactivate its systems, the scars of the battle lingered in the minds of both factions. For the Brotherhood, HELIOS One represented the moment their ambitions in the Mojave were crushed, their doctrine exposed as outdated, and their leader revealed as fallible in the worst possible way. It was the defeat that broke the chapter, forcing them into isolation, paranoia, and decline, setting the stage for years of internal conflict, mistrust, and the eventual political struggle between Head Paladin Hardin and Elder McNamara. The Battle of HELIOS One, though only a single event in the long history of the wasteland, became the defining wound around which all future decisions, alliances, and tragedies of the Mojave Brotherhood would revolve, a constant reminder that even the most disciplined and technologically advanced warriors can fall when their leaders misjudge the world and cling too tightly to doctrines that no longer match reality. In the aftermath of the Battle of HELIOS One, the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel was forced into a retreat that was as much psychological as it was physical. An arduous withdrawal from the open desert and contested sites back into the fortified, cavernous bunkers of Hidden Valley, where the remnants of a once proud chapter confronted the full magnitude of their losses, the collapse of leadership under Elder Elijah, and the sobering realization that the survival of their order now depended entirely on discipline, secrecy, and the strict maintenance of a hierarchy designed for war, but now tested in a prolonged period of isolation. Upon entering the Hidden Valley complex, the surviving paladins, knights, and scribes faced an immediate challenge of reorganizing their shattered forces, accounting for the wounded, the dead, and the scattered members who had fled into the Mojave Desert, many of whom would never return, and establishing a chain of command that could function under extreme duress, a task complicated by the lingering influence of Elijah's strategies and the ideological fractures that had emerged during the failed HELIOS One campaign, as some veterans called for a return to aggressive operations to reclaim honor, while others argued that prudence, conservation, and secrecy must now define every Brotherhood action to prevent further annihilation at the hands of the new California Republic. Within the cavernous bunkers, the chapter re-established its daily routines with a focus on rationing supplies, maintaining armored suits, repairing weapons, and preserving whatever pre-war technology could be salvaged from the retreat. Yet these tasks were conducted under the constant shadow of scarcity. As ammunition stores had been depleted during the battle, energy cells were in limited supply, and critical components for maintaining the operation of power, armor, and energy weapons were irretrievably lost in the open desert, forcing scribes to innovate repair techniques and scavenge what they could from the surrounding Mojave, all while keeping operations invisible from the NCR, who now monitored the region closely, aware that the Brotherhood remained a potential threat despite their weakened state. The bunker itself, while defensible, presented a different set of challenges, as the Hidden Valley complex was designed primarily for long-term occupation and storage rather than sustained military engagement, requiring the Brotherhood to balance operational readiness with life support, food production, and maintenance of environmental control systems, a balance complicated by the fact that morale had been deeply undermined by the HELIOS One defeat, leaving many paladins questioning their purpose, their leadership, and even the wisdom of following the doctrines that had led to such catastrophic losses, a psychological burden that Elder McNamara, newly appointed after Elijah's departure, had to address with a combination of discipline, strategic foresight, and quiet reassurance to prevent further internal collapse. Rationing became a daily ritual, with food and water carefully measured and distributed according to rank and need, while patrols and reconnaissance missions were limited in scope and highly regimented to prevent exposure to NCR scouts or raider ambushes, forcing paladins to adapt to an existence of extreme caution that contrasted sharply with the aggressive operations that had defined the Brotherhood's earlier campaigns in the Mojave. Within these constraints, the internal hierarchy became even more rigid, with Head Paladin Hardin emerging as a key figure who enforced discipline, organized the remaining combat units, and oversaw the training of younger recruits in the new reality of defensive operations, while Elder McNamara focused on broader strategy, assessing the chapter's vulnerabilities, preserving knowledge, and maintaining morale, often mediating disputes that arose from differing opinions on whether to launch offensive operations to reclaim lost sites or to conserve forces entirely. Understanding that any misstep could attract NCR attention or further weaken the already fragile chapter, the scribes assumed a critical role during this period, becoming the intellectual backbone of the chapter's efforts to adapt to life in isolation, cataloging salvaged technology, repairing equipment under severe constraints, and documenting the battle's lessons to prevent future strategic errors, their work forming a repository of knowledge that would define the chapter's operational philosophy for years to come, and providing guidance for paladins who required precise technical data to maintain power armor, laser rifles, and other advanced systems without the logistical support they had previously taken for granted. Security protocols were intensified, with watch rotations extending around the clock and strict monitoring of every entry point to the bunker complex, including hidden access tunnels and surface-level observation posts, ensuring that no unauthorized personnel could breach the sanctity of the Brotherhood's last stronghold in the Mojave. This intense vigilance, however, came at a cost. Paladins endured extended periods underground, in dimly lit corridors echoing with the hum of ventilation systems and the metallic clang of maintenance work, leading to both physical exhaustion and mental strain, which was mitigated only partially by formalized drills, training exercises, and carefully scheduled duties designed to keep members occupied and focused on the mission rather than the fear of the world beyond the bunker walls. Social structures also hardened in the bunker, as rank distinctions became more pronounced, with veteran paladins assuming authority over new recruits, not only in matters of combat and technical expertise, but also in daily life, reinforcing a culture of obedience and loyalty, while simultaneously stifling dissent or deviation from established doctrine, a necessity in a chapter whose very survival depended on cohesion and absolute adherence to command. The isolation, while protective, also created an environment in which rumor, fear, and superstition could flourish, leading some members to interpret the NCR's distant patrols and sightings as harbingers of imminent attack, reinforcing the belief that the outside world was hostile, unreliable, and incapable of understanding the Brotherhood's mission, and cementing a worldview in which survival, secrecy, and technological preservation became not only a practical necessity but a moral imperative, the very essence of the Brotherhood's identity. Even logistics were transformed by the retreat, as supply chains that had once extended to Lost Hills were effectively severed, leaving the Mojave chapter entirely dependent on scavenging, careful resource allocation, and limited contact with caravans that could be trusted not to betray their location to NCR forces or opportunistic raiders. Within this context, recruitment and training took on new dimensions, as young initiates were subjected to rigorous education not only in combat and technical skills, but also in doctrine, philosophy, and the history of the Brotherhood, emphasizing the mistakes of previous campaigns, the dangers of technological misuse, and the paramount importance of loyalty, secrecy, and obedience. In essence, forging a generation of warriors and scholars conditioned to endure scarcity, anticipate threats, and maintain the chapter's continuity in a hostile, changing world. Over time, the Hidden Valley Bunker became a microcosm of the Brotherhood's ideals, a place where the hierarchy, technological preservation, and discipline intersected to create a functioning but fragile society, operating under the constant knowledge that the NCR had claimed victory in the Mojave, and that any further misstep could invite destruction. Yet, it was also a place of renewal, where surviving members could consolidate their forces, evaluate their losses, and plan the future of the chapter according to lessons learned from HELIOS One, balancing the necessity of defense with the preservation of culture, knowledge, and honor. Thus, life inside Hidden Valley post-defeat was characterized by a careful, often tense, equilibrium, a mixture of mourning, reconstruction, and preparation, a period in which the Mojave Brotherhood learned that survival required both strict adherence to doctrine and the sober recognition of their new limitations. And it was within this crucible that the foundations were laid for the internal struggles, leadership conflicts, and eventual encounters with the Courier that would define the next chapter of their history in the Mojave wasteland. The rise of Head Paladin Hardin within the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel marked a pivotal moment in the chapter's history, representing both a consolidation of authority in the aftermath of catastrophic defeat and the emergence of internal factionalism that would shape the organization's trajectory for years to come, a period in which the survivors of HELIOS One, still recovering from physical losses and shattered morale, found themselves navigating the complex interplay of loyalty, ambition, and ideological interpretation while attempting to rebuild a chapter that had been severely weakened by both external conflict and internal misjudgments. And to understand the significance of Hardin's ascendancy, it is necessary to examine the conditions within Hidden Valley following the retreat from HELIOS One, where the bunkers had become both sanctuary and crucible, a place where the Brotherhood's rigid hierarchy was tested not only by dwindling resources and isolation, but also by differing visions of how the chapter should proceed in a Mojave increasingly dominated by the new California Republic. Hardin, a veteran paladin with extensive field experience and a reputation for tactical competence, emerged as a figure whose decisive nature and uncompromising adherence to traditional Brotherhood values attracted the loyalty of many knights and younger paladins, who saw in him a leader capable of restoring order and enforcing the principles that had guided the Brotherhood since Lost Hills. Yet his rise was not without controversy, as others, including more moderate elements aligned with Elder McNamara's cautious approach, viewed Hardin's philosophy as dangerously aggressive, favoring confrontation over diplomacy and doctrinal purity over pragmatic adaptation, a tension that would define the internal politics of the Mojave chapter for the years following the HELIOS One disaster. The early stages of Hardin's influence were characterized by his methodical assumption of operational command over patrols, training exercises, and the allocation of scarce resources, all of which were traditionally under the purview of the Elder. Yet Hardin's field experience and decisiveness allowed him to assert authority in situations where quick, unilateral decisions were required, particularly when scouting the Mojave, securing salvageable pre-war equipment, or responding to NCR movements near Hidden Valley. Actions that, while effective in the short term, often challenged the established hierarchy and created friction with the Elder and other senior scribes, who were accustomed to deliberative planning and measured response rather than rapid, sometimes aggressive, tactical initiatives. Factionalism within the bunker deepened as Hardin's approach gained traction among paladins who had been disillusioned by the passive stance of the post-HELIOS One leadership, especially those who had witnessed firsthand the destructive consequences of indecision and believed that only a renewed display of force, discipline, and proactive engagement could prevent further losses, while McNamara loyalists countered that reckless actions might provoke the NCR and ensure the chapter's complete destruction, a debate that was rarely resolved through dialogue, instead manifesting in subtle power plays, competing patrol directives, and disputes over the distribution of weapons, energy cells, and strategic assignments, creating an environment in which the line between obedience and dissent became increasingly blurred. Hardin's ideology, in essence, was shaped by his interpretation of the Brotherhood's foundational mission, the belief that technological stewardship required absolute control, that threats to pre-war knowledge could not be tolerated under any circumstances, and that engagement with hostile forces, even when numerically disadvantaged, was preferable to passive observation or compromise, a philosophy that resonated strongly with paladins who equated caution with weakness and saw the failures at HELIOS One as proof that hesitation could be fatal. Yet it also alarmed those who recognized that the Mojave chapter, reduced in numbers and resources, could not sustain prolonged conflict with the NCR without risking total annihilation. The practical implementation of Hardin's philosophy manifested in multiple ways, including increased emphasis on field drills, more aggressive reconnaissance missions beyond the immediate vicinity of Hidden Valley, stricter enforcement of discipline, and the selective promotion of paladins who demonstrated both initiative and loyalty to his interpretation of Brotherhood doctrine, creating a dual structure in which operational command rested increasingly with Hardin, while strategic oversight and ideological guidance nominally remained under Elder McNamara, a division of authority that, although unspoken, was clearly understood by all members of the chapter, and which would later influence the political dynamics leading to the Hardin takeover and the potential divergence of the Mojave Brotherhood's future. In addition to operational measures, Hardin also engaged in careful political maneuvering, cultivating alliances among younger knights and influential scribes whose technical expertise and loyalty could reinforce his authority, while subtly undermining McNamara loyalists through selective task assignments, restrictive access to intelligence, and the framing of decisions in terms of loyalty and mission effectiveness, a method that, while not openly hostile, gradually shifted the balance of power within the bunker and created an environment in which members were increasingly forced to choose sides, a choice that often depended as much on personal trust and ambition as on agreement with doctrine. Hardin's rise was further bolstered by his ability to communicate a vision that resonated with the psychological needs of a chapter recovering from disaster, a promise of renewed relevance, disciplined purpose, and the restoration of the Brotherhood's honor in the Mojave, all framed within the familiar language of tradition, hierarchy, and unyielding dedication to technological stewardship, which allowed him to consolidate influence despite the continued presence of Elder McNamara and the formal hierarchy that, on paper, remained intact. However, this consolidation of authority was not without consequence, as the growing factionalism introduced new vulnerabilities, particularly the risk of internal conflict, at a time when the chapter's survival depended on unity, and the increasingly polarized atmosphere meant that disagreements over strategy, engagement with the NCR, and allocation of limited resources could escalate into overt disputes or even physical confrontations if left unchecked. The duality of power in the post-HELIOS One chapter, with Hardin representing a proactive, aggressive faction and McNamara representing a cautious, defensive faction, created an ongoing tension that defined the chapter's political landscape, influenced patrol patterns, and shaped decision-making processes in every domain, from training and supply management to intelligence gathering and operational priorities, ultimately ensuring that the Mojave Brotherhood's response to future NCR incursions would be influenced as much by internal dynamics as by external threats. Despite the challenges, Hardin's leadership brought tangible improvements to the chapter's operational readiness. As patrols became more disciplined, technical maintenance was accelerated, and morale among his supporters stabilized, creating a semblance of order in a chapter still grappling with the trauma of previous defeats. Yet the very methods that reinforced cohesion also deepened divisions, laying the groundwork for the dramatic choices, power struggles, and potential schisms that would define the Mojave Brotherhood's trajectory for decades, illustrating that even in retreat and isolation, leadership, ideology, and factionalism are inseparable forces shaping the survival, purpose, and ultimate fate of an organization as ideologically rigid and technologically focused as the Brotherhood of Steel. Following the catastrophic loss at HELIOS One and the retreat into Hidden Valley, Elder McNamara assumed the mantle of leadership for the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, a role that required not only the preservation of the chapter's dwindling personnel and resources, but also the careful management of internal dissent and the mitigation of external threats, a task complicated by the rise of Head Paladin Hardin, whose aggressive approach to doctrine and strategy had already begun to reshape the chapter's political landscape, and McNamara, aware that any misstep could result in the complete annihilation of the Mojave chapter, adopted a leadership style defined by caution, secrecy, and strategic patience, emphasizing the consolidation of forces, the careful rationing of supplies, and the rigorous maintenance of internal hierarchy to preserve the Brotherhood's operational integrity while remaining invisible to the increasingly dominant New California Republic, whose military presence in the Mojave had grown steadily in the months following HELIOS One, transforming the surrounding desert from open terrain into a monitored and militarized space, where any movement outside the Hidden Valley bunker could result in detection, confrontation, or outright destruction, thereby forcing McNamara to adopt a philosophy in which survival, discretion, and prudence took precedence over offensive operations or attempts to reclaim lost territory. His leadership approach was grounded in a profound understanding of the Brotherhood's precarious position. Although they retained their advanced technology, combat experience, and doctrinal knowledge, their numbers had been severely reduced, supply lines severed, and morale shattered, meaning that even minor errors in judgment could be fatal. And so McNamara invested significant energy in planning, surveillance, and internal coordination, ensuring that every patrol, supply mission, and defensive post was calculated to minimize risk while maintaining readiness for potential NCR incursions. Within the bunkers, McNamara reinforced strict operational protocols, dictating how patrols should be conducted, how scribes should manage and repair technology, and how paladins should prioritize defensive positions, emphasizing that discipline and obedience were essential to survival, yet doing so with a recognition of the human element. Understanding that those who had survived Helios One were traumatized by the loss of comrades, the abandonment by Elder Elijah, and the sudden shift from offensive operations to a defensive, subterranean existence, and that morale was as critical to survival as armor, energy cells, or weaponry. Secrecy, under McNamara's leadership, became a central tenet of the chapter's operations, extending from the physical fortifications of Hidden Valley to the conduct of all internal communications, patrol reporting, and strategic planning. And this culture of concealment was designed to protect the Brotherhood from the NCR's extensive reconnaissance network, raider interference, and the possibility of betrayal by members who might be swayed by promises of reward, ideological alignment with the Republic, or fear of reprisal. As McNamara recognized that a single lapse in security could compromise the entire chapter, undoing years of careful rebuilding and rendering their efforts at survival moot. The Elder's cautious philosophy was also reflected in his handling of internal factionalism, particularly the growing influence of Hardin and his supporters, whose preference for aggressive patrols, preemptive engagement, and visible demonstrations of force ran counter to McNamara's long-term goals. Rather than confronting Hardin directly, which could provoke a schism or reduce operational cohesion, McNamara sought to maintain balance, delegating tactical decisions to Hardin in a controlled manner, while retaining ultimate authority over strategic planning, resource allocation, and policy decisions, thereby creating a duality of command in which Hardin's assertiveness was channeled in ways that did not compromise the chapter's overall security, yet leaving an underlying tension that persisted as a latent threat to unity. In addition to managing personnel and internal politics, McNamara's leadership was characterized by a methodical approach to resource preservation, particularly with regard to energy weapons, power armor, ammunition, and critical pre-war technology, all of which had become both a lifeline and a liability. If misused, or allowed to fall into the hands of outsiders, these assets could provoke conflict or accelerate the chapter's destruction, and so McNamara instituted a strict system of inventory, maintenance, and access control, relying heavily on scribes and experienced paladins to enforce these measures, while simultaneously training new recruits in both technical proficiency and the philosophical principles underlying the Brotherhood's mission, creating a culture in which knowledge and technology were inseparable from loyalty, discipline, and survival. McNamara also recognized that life in the Mojave, even within the protective confines of Hidden Valley, required constant attention to both immediate and long-term threats, and so he established rigorous reconnaissance protocols, observation posts at the bunker's surface exits, and rotating patrols that minimized exposure while maximizing intelligence gathering on NCR movements, raider activity, and potential environmental hazards, ensuring that the Brotherhood remained aware of changes in the Mojave landscape without compromising their secrecy, and maintaining a careful balance between vigilance and conservation to prevent attrition through overextension. Psychological resilience was another aspect of McNamara's leadership, as he sought to instill a sense of purpose, patience, and cohesion among survivors who were acutely aware of the chapter's diminished status. His strategy relied on fostering an internal narrative that framed the retreat and isolation not as defeat, but as a period of necessary recuperation and preservation, emphasizing the eventual opportunity to restore the Brotherhood's strength when circumstances permitted, and thereby preventing despair, dissent, and attrition among the members, who were living in conditions that demanded constant discipline, sacrifice, and vigilance. The elders' policies extended to the education and indoctrination of new recruits, whose training under McNamara emphasized caution, obedience, and adherence to doctrine, teaching them not only the technical skills necessary for combat and maintenance of pre-war technology, but also the philosophical principles that justified a defensive, clandestine approach to survival. Recruits were instructed to prioritize stealth, intelligence gathering, and careful observation over unnecessary confrontation, reinforcing the elders' belief that survival depended as much on prudence and foresight as on firepower, and that the mistakes of HELIOS One were to be avoided through discipline, patience, and the controlled application of force. Despite the emphasis on caution and secrecy, McNamara's leadership was not entirely passive. He encouraged selective strategic initiatives that could strengthen the chapter's position without provoking the NCR unnecessarily, such as the careful recovery of abandoned pre-war technology, limited scouting missions to map raider movements, and the establishment of secure communication methods within the Hidden Valley bunker, all designed to maintain operational capability while minimizing exposure, and to prepare the Brotherhood for eventual re-emergence when circumstances became favorable. Ultimately, McNamara's leadership style, rooted in caution, secrecy, and long-term strategic thinking, preserved the Mojave Brotherhood in the wake of overwhelming defeat, enabling the chapter to survive as a cohesive entity despite the loss of manpower, resources, and the commanding influence of Elder Elijah, while simultaneously managing the delicate political balance with Head Paladin Hardin, maintaining morale among traumatized survivors, safeguarding technological assets, and avoiding the provocation of the new California Republic. His approach reflected a fundamental understanding that the survival of the Brotherhood depended not on immediate triumphs or displays of power, but on patient, calculated stewardship, the careful management of people and technology, and the unyielding adherence to doctrine, tempered by the recognition of a world in which aggression without preparation could only lead to annihilation. The Paladins of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, forming the backbone of the chapter's military and operational capacity following the catastrophic defeat at HELIOS One, represent a synthesis of rigorous martial training, doctrinal indoctrination, and an unwavering commitment to the preservation of pre-war technology, a combination that defines both their daily existence within Hidden Valley and their approach to interactions with the hostile Mojave environment, the new California Republic, raider factions, and other potential threats, and understanding the culture, duties, and internal pressures placed upon these elite warriors requires a comprehensive examination of the structures that govern their lives, the philosophical framework that underpins their actions, and the practical realities imposed by life in isolation after one of the most devastating setbacks in Brotherhood history. Each Paladin, regardless of rank, is bound by a strict code of conduct, codified by the elders, and reinforced through rigorous training exercises, technical proficiency assessments, and continuous evaluation of loyalty, courage, and competence. This code dictates that the preservation of knowledge and technology is paramount, and that all personal ambition, fear, or Hesitation must be subordinated to the chapter's objectives, a principle that ensures cohesion in the face of overwhelming external threats, but also imposes a psychological burden on every member, particularly in the wake of the catastrophic HELIOS One defeat, where nearly all surviving paladins were confronted with the deaths of comrades, the betrayal of leadership, and the stark reality of their chapter's diminished capacity. Training for Mojave paladins is extensive, blending combat, reconnaissance, survival skills, and technological mastery, beginning with initiates who undergo a sequence of indoctrination rituals, rigorous physical conditioning, and technical education designed to instill not only competence, but also a deep understanding of the Brotherhood's mission and history. This training emphasizes that mastery over technology is inseparable from mastery over self, and that the proper use of pre-war weaponry, power armor, and energy-based systems is both a privilege and a moral responsibility, an education that reinforces the weight of tradition and the perceived necessity of absolute discipline in a world that the Brotherhood regards as irredeemably fragile and chaotic. Beyond technical and combat training, paladins are expected to conduct regular patrols, reconnaissance missions, and defensive operations, tasks which serve multiple purposes: securing the Hidden Valley bunker and its surrounding approaches, observing NCR movements, monitoring raider and wildlife activity, and retrieving pre-war equipment or supplies that may have been abandoned or overlooked in prior conflicts. These duties are often dangerous, requiring long excursions into the Mojave, navigation through terrain that includes arid deserts, rocky canyons, and irradiated zones, as well as encounters with hostile human and animal elements. Yet they are considered essential for the maintenance of both the chapter's survival and its operational knowledge base. The culture of the Paladins is heavily hierarchical, with authority strictly observed and rank delineated according to skill, experience, and service record, ensuring that orders are executed without hesitation and that operational cohesion remains intact even under the extreme pressures of combat or environmental stress. Within this framework, loyalty to the Elder, the chapter, and the Brotherhood's codified mission takes precedence over personal preference, yet subtle nuances of camaraderie, mentorship, and respect develop between paladins who serve together in high-risk situations, forming bonds that reinforce the chapter's resilience while also creating a network of influence that can impact internal politics, particularly in the tension between Head Paladin Hardin's faction and Elder McNamara's cautious leadership. Ritual, ceremony, and the veneration of the Brotherhood's history play a central role in the Paladin's daily life, serving to reinforce identity, instill discipline, and maintain morale, particularly in periods of enforced isolation such as the years following HELIOS One, where external victories were scarce and the chapter's survival depended as much on psychological cohesion as on tactical skill. These rituals include formal oaths, the observance of historical lessons from Lost Hills, and the ceremonial inspection and maintenance of pre-war technology, which is treated as both sacred and utilitarian, a tangible representation of the Brotherhood's mission and the justification for their often rigid adherence to doctrine. In addition to martial and technical duties, paladins are often called upon to train and mentor younger initiates and lower-ranked knights, transmitting not only knowledge of weaponry, tactics, and repair procedures, but also the philosophical framework that defines the Mojave Brotherhood's identity. This educational role reinforces the cultural continuity of the chapter, ensuring that even as external circumstances change and personnel are lost to combat, accidents, or desertion, the principles governing the Brotherhood remain intact, and that the ideological commitment to technological preservation continues to guide operational behavior. The weight of tradition is a constant presence in the life of every paladin, manifesting in both pride and burden. Pride in being a member of an elite, disciplined order, entrusted with the guardianship of humanity's most dangerous and valuable knowledge, and burden in the understanding that failure, error, or deviation from the prescribed code can have catastrophic consequences, both for the individual and for the chapter. This duality shapes decision-making, encourages meticulous planning, and fosters a cautious but deliberate approach to every action. Yet it also creates tension when the demands of survival conflict with the imperatives of doctrine, as seen in debates over patrol routes, engagement with the NCR, and the handling of salvaged pre-war technology. The responsibilities of paladins extend beyond the immediate confines of combat and survival, as they are often involved in intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, and the assessment of both human and environmental threats in the Mojave, tasks that require judgment, discretion, and an acute awareness of the risks of exposure or entanglement with hostile parties. These operations, while essential to the chapter's security, also serve as a mechanism for evaluating initiative, loyalty, and tactical acumen, forming an internal meritocracy that rewards competence and reinforces the hierarchy, while simultaneously providing a practical means of maintaining situational awareness in a region dominated by the NCR and other hostile forces. The culture of the Paladins is reinforced through continuous evaluation, peer observation, and adherence to strict codes of conduct, emphasizing accountability, precision, and ethical restraint, particularly with respect to the handling of pre-war technologies and the use of lethal force, which are treated not merely as tactical considerations, but as moral obligations. This focus on ethical stewardship is both a reflection of doctrinal principles and a practical mechanism for ensuring cohesion and preventing reckless behavior that could draw NCR attention or provoke retaliation. Daily life for paladins involves a structured routine that balances training, maintenance, patrol, preparation, and doctrinal study, a regimen designed to instill discipline, optimize readiness, and reinforce the psychological resilience necessary to endure isolation, the threat of external attack, and the weight of responsibility inherent in their role as guardians of advanced technology. These routines also foster an internal culture of professionalism, competence, and mutual respect, creating an environment in which loyalty to the chapter and its mission becomes inseparable from identity, purpose, and survival. The operational philosophy of the Paladins, combining strict adherence to doctrine with practical skill in combat and technology management, serves as both a stabilizing force and a potential point of tension, particularly in interactions with Head Paladin Hardin, whose aggressive initiatives sometimes push the limits of doctrine, and Elder McNamara, whose cautious approach emphasizes concealment and survival, creating a dynamic in which paladins must navigate competing interpretations of mission priorities while maintaining operational efficiency, morale, and loyalty. Ultimately, the paladins of the Mojave embody the synthesis of martial discipline, technological mastery, and ideological fidelity, living under the constant pressure of environmental danger, resource scarcity, and political tension within the chapter, and their culture, duties, and adherence to tradition define the resilience of the Mojave Brotherhood, enabling the chapter to survive in a hostile world, maintain cohesion under stress, and prepare for the eventual challenges that would determine the fate of their mission, their chapter, and their place in the Mojave wasteland. The scribes of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, often overshadowed in popular accounts by the martial accomplishments of paladins and knights, form the indispensable intellectual and technical backbone of the chapter, tasked with the meticulous preservation, analysis, and repair of pre-war technology, a responsibility that is central to the Brotherhood's mission, and whose importance became increasingly apparent following the catastrophic loss at HELIOS One, when the chapter's survival depended not only on the maintenance of combat readiness, but also on the careful safeguarding of knowledge and the ability to reconstruct, repair, and repurpose the limited resources that remained within the Hidden Valley bunker, a subterranean environment where every energy cell, mechanical component, and terminal represents both lifeline and potential liability in the eyes of the Elder, the Head Paladin, and the chapter at large. The scribes operate under a strict hierarchical structure, reporting directly to the Elder while coordinating closely with paladins to ensure that all technological assets, from laser rifles to power armor and the remains of advanced energy systems salvaged from the Mojave, are maintained at peak operational capacity, and their work encompasses not only the repair and upkeep of hardware, but also the analysis of pre-war schematics, the construction of improvised solutions to component shortages, and the documentation of new techniques or discoveries that could enhance both the longevity of equipment and the safety of the chapter's members. A multifaceted role that requires both intellectual rigor and practical skill, as errors in judgment can result in catastrophic failures, injuries, or loss of critical resources in a context where resupply is uncertain and exposure to hostile forces is always possible. Within Hidden Valley, the scribes have established a network of laboratories, workshops, and storage chambers that function as both operational centers and repositories for the chapter's accumulated knowledge, with each terminal, filing cabinet, and workbench carefully catalogued, secured, and monitored, reflecting the Brotherhood's near-religious approach to the preservation of technology. And within this controlled environment, they perform painstaking repairs on everything from crude pre-war firearms to highly specialized energy weapons and armor components, often improvising solutions when critical parts are unavailable, all while adhering to strict safety protocols designed to prevent accidents, prevent contamination, and maintain the secrecy of their operations from NCR patrols, raiders, and wandering wastelanders who could compromise their position. The work of the scribes extends beyond maintenance. They serve as historians and archivists, documenting the evolution of technology, the outcomes of past conflicts, and the lessons learned from engagements such as HELIOS One, creating a living repository of knowledge that informs both strategy and training within the chapter, and ensures that the mistakes of the past are neither forgotten nor repeated, a critical function in a chapter where the loss of institutional memory could spell disaster in future engagements. Technological research within the Hidden Valley bunker, led by the scribes, often involves the careful study of energy systems, weapon calibration, and the mechanics of pre-war machinery, with projects prioritized according to potential strategic value, likelihood of successful repair, and the availability of necessary components, reflecting the dual imperatives of survival and doctrine, as every initiative must either directly support the chapter's defensive capabilities or enhance its capacity to safeguard technology from misuse or destruction by external actors. Scribes also play a critical role in training new members of the chapter, instructing recruits and lower-ranked paladins in the operation, maintenance, and ethical use of advanced equipment, reinforcing the Brotherhood's doctrinal principles while ensuring that technical knowledge is widely disseminated within the chapter without compromising security or operational effectiveness. And this instructional role extends to the mentorship of apprentices who show exceptional aptitude, allowing for the cultivation of specialized expertise that strengthens the chapter's long-term resilience. The scribe's responsibilities also include intelligence analysis, as they are often tasked with interpreting intercepted communications, analyzing NCR movement patterns, and evaluating the condition of captured or salvaged equipment to assess enemy capabilities, providing the Elder and Paladins with actionable insights that shape operational planning and resource allocation, demonstrating that their role is not confined to the static environment of the bunker, but has direct impact on the Brotherhood's strategic posture throughout the Mojave. Daily life for a scribe in Hidden Valley is regimented, combining long hours of meticulous repair work with study, experimentation, and observation, often conducted in isolation or in small teams to minimize errors and maintain operational security. Their workspaces are equipped with redundant power systems, careful environmental controls, and extensive records, ensuring that both ongoing projects and long-term research can continue uninterrupted even under conditions of external threat, and that the knowledge preserved within the bunker remains intact regardless of changes in personnel, leadership, or external circumstance. The psychological demands of the scribe's work are considerable, as the weight of responsibility is magnified by the knowledge that a single mistake, whether miscalculation, overlooked defect, or inadvertent disclosure, could imperil the entire chapter, making meticulous attention to detail, procedural rigor, and constant vigilance essential components of professional culture. These pressures, combined with the isolation of bunker life and the scarcity of external stimulation, foster a culture of intellectual rigor, disciplined methodology, and moral seriousness, in which scribes derive both status and identity from their capacity to preserve the chapter's technological and doctrinal legacy. Scribes often collaborate closely with paladins and knights in field operations, providing technical support for energy weapon deployment, armor maintenance, and the interpretation of environmental hazards, a coordination that reinforces the interdependence of martial and intellectual expertise within the Brotherhood, as operational effectiveness relies equally on the precision of weapon systems and the skill of the warriors who wield them, and underscores the Brotherhood's philosophy that technology and combat proficiency are inseparable in the pursuit of their mission. Within this framework, the scribes serve not only as technical experts, but also as ethical stewards, tasked with making decisions about which technologies can be utilized, repaired, or dismantled, guided by both doctrinal edict and practical necessity, a role that places them at the intersection of survival, morality, and organizational governance, as their choices directly influence the chapter's capacity to defend itself, maintain operational independence, and uphold the ideological principles upon which the Brotherhood was founded. The long-term significance of the scribe's work becomes most apparent when considering the Mojave Brotherhood's precarious position. Isolated, diminished in numbers, and surrounded by an expanding NCR presence, the preservation and repair of pre-war technology, the continuous study of scientific and military systems, and the careful transmission of knowledge to new members are not merely tasks, but existential imperatives, ensuring that the chapter remains capable of defending its people, maintaining its mission, and adapting to future threats despite material scarcity and external hostility, and highlighting the inextricable link between intellectual labor and organizational survival within the Brotherhood's rigidly structured, tradition-driven society. In essence, the scribes of the Mojave Brotherhood embody the principle that knowledge is power, preservation is duty, and meticulous, disciplined effort is as vital to the survival of the chapter as the courage, combat skill, and loyalty of its paladins, a principle that has enabled the Mojave chapter to endure, recover, and maintain its identity in the harsh and contested wasteland of the Mojave while upholding the doctrinal, technological, and moral standards established by the Brotherhood since the earliest days at Lost Hills, and reaffirmed through the trials of conflict, defeat, and retreat that define their ongoing struggle in New Vegas and beyond. The Hidden Valley patrols of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel represent the operational eyes, ears, and first line of defense for the chapter following the catastrophic loss at HELIOS One, a series of highly disciplined, meticulously organized, and strategically critical excursions that extend outward from the subterranean bunkers into the harsh, irradiated, and politically fragmented terrain of the Mojave wasteland, where the Brotherhood must contend not only with environmental hazards, hostile wildlife, and raider activity, but also with the growing military presence of the new California Republic, whose patrols, checkpoints, and settlements increasingly dominate the landscape, and understanding the structure, purpose, and daily conduct of these patrols is essential to comprehending how the Mojave Brotherhood, despite reduced numbers and depleted resources, maintains situational awareness, preserves its technological assets, and prepares for the inevitable political and military confrontations that define its existence. Patrols are conducted primarily by paladins and a select cadre of knights, who are chosen based on their experience, loyalty, and proficiency in both combat and reconnaissance, with leadership typically assigned to a veteran officer capable of making rapid tactical decisions in the field, balancing the need for stealth with the imperative to gather actionable intelligence, and maintaining strict communication protocols to minimize the risk of exposure to NCR scouts or raider informants, who are constantly on the lookout for evidence of Brotherhood activity in the region. Each patrol is meticulously planned, beginning with a thorough briefing that outlines objectives, risk assessments, resource allocations, and contingency measures, and these operations are designed to achieve multiple overlapping goals: monitoring NCR troop movements, assessing potential raider threats, mapping the surrounding terrain, identifying abandoned pre-war facilities for potential salvage, and testing the durability and reliability of armor, energy weapons, and other pre-war technologies in real-world conditions, all while ensuring that the patrols can withdraw without detection if circumstances change or enemy forces engage, a strategy that reflects Elder McNamara's overarching philosophy of caution and discretion in the face of overwhelming external threats. Patrol routes are carefully selected to maximize observation while minimizing exposure, often utilizing natural cover, high vantage points, and pre-existing environmental features such as canyon walls, dry riverbeds, and rock formations, while also accounting for environmental hazards, including radiation hotspots, unstable terrain, and unpredictable weather conditions, all of which are rigorously documented and incorporated into subsequent planning, allowing the Brotherhood to adapt its tactics to the Mojave's unforgiving environment and reinforcing the principle that knowledge and preparation are as critical to survival as firepower or numbers. During these patrols, Brotherhood units engage in a range of reconnaissance activities, including surveillance of NCR outposts, mapping of supply routes, and monitoring of raider encampments, often gathering intelligence that informs both strategic decisions and internal reports, and all observations are meticulously recorded, analyzed, and transmitted back to Hidden Valley via secure methods, ensuring that Elder McNamara and the chapter's leadership maintain a comprehensive situational awareness that can guide decisions on resource allocation, defensive measures, and potential offensive actions. Skirmishes, while rare, are an unavoidable aspect of patrol life, arising when Brotherhood forces encounter hostile entities in the field, whether raiders, mutated wildlife, or NCR forces who have inadvertently encroached on perceived Brotherhood territory. These engagements are carefully managed to achieve tactical objectives while minimizing risk, with paladins trained to utilize cover, terrain, and advanced weaponry to neutralize threats efficiently. And all encounters are followed by detailed field reports that document the outcome, casualties, environmental conditions, and any salvaged equipment, ensuring that each engagement contributes to the chapter's ongoing intelligence database and informs future operational planning. The field reports themselves are a critical aspect of the Brotherhood's operational doctrine, combining quantitative data such as troop movements, ammunition expenditure, and structural observations with qualitative assessments of enemy behavior, morale, and potential strategic intent. And these reports are reviewed not only by the elder and senior paladins but also by scribes, who analyze technological findings, assess the condition of salvaged equipment, and identify patterns that might indicate emerging threats or opportunities, creating a feedback loop in which field intelligence informs strategy, training, and resource management, and reinforces the interdependent relationship between combat and technical expertise within the chapter. Patrols also serve a symbolic and psychological function within the Brotherhood, maintaining a presence in the Mojave despite numerical inferiority, and conveying the message that the Brotherhood's mission endures even in isolation and retreat, instilling confidence among the surviving members, and projecting an aura of vigilance and capability that may deter opportunistic attacks by raiders or encroachment by NCR forces. And these efforts, though subtle, are essential for the preservation of morale and the reinforcement of hierarchical authority within Hidden Valley. Logistical considerations are paramount for patrol operations, as each excursion must be self-sufficient in terms of food, water, ammunition, and medical supplies, given the difficulty of resupply in hostile territory, and each unit is equipped with redundant systems to ensure operational continuity even under duress, including portable power packs for energy weapons, field repair kits for armor and machinery, and secure communication devices to maintain coordination with other patrols and the bunker leadership, reflecting the Brotherhood's meticulous attention to detail and the integration of technological expertise with combat readiness. Training and mentorship occur in parallel with patrol operations, as veteran paladins are responsible for preparing younger recruits for the rigors of fieldwork, teaching them not only navigation, combat tactics, and technological maintenance, but also the philosophical and doctrinal principles that underlie the Brotherhood's operational ethos, emphasizing that each patrol is both a practical exercise in survival and an extension of the chapter's mission to safeguard pre-war knowledge and enforce disciplined, ethical conduct in the face of a chaotic and often hostile wasteland. The cumulative effect of patrols is to maintain a continuous flow of intelligence, operational experience, and technological assessment that allows the Mojave Brotherhood to adapt to the shifting dynamics of the wasteland, balance the competing pressures of aggressive initiative and cautious survival, and preserve both material and moral cohesion within a chapter that has been reduced by past losses and is constantly threatened by external forces. In essence, the Hidden Valley patrols function as the eyes, ears, and vigilant guardians of the Mojave Brotherhood, translating the chapter's doctrinal imperatives into practical, everyday actions that safeguard the bunkers, inform strategic decisions, and maintain the operational integrity necessary for survival in a hostile, irradiated, and politically contested environment, ensuring that even in retreat, secrecy, and isolation, the Brotherhood remains a force defined by discipline, vigilance, and the unyielding commitment to the preservation of technology, knowledge, and tradition in the Mojave wasteland. The arrival of the Courier in the Mojave wasteland represented an unprecedented variable in the carefully controlled calculations of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, a force whose presence challenged established hierarchies, disrupted strategic expectations, and introduced the potential for both reconciliation and internal upheaval, as the Courier, an individual of unknown allegiance and extraordinary adaptability, became entangled in the Brotherhood's internal politics, operational planning, and future prospects, forcing Elder McNamara, Head Paladin Hardin, and the chapter as a whole to confront questions of loyalty, influence, and the extent to which external actors could affect the survival and doctrinal integrity of their faction, a dilemma that illustrates the complex intersection of ideology, pragmatism, and human agency within the Brotherhood's rigidly structured society. The initial contact with the Courier occurred during reconnaissance missions in the Mojave, when scouts and paladins encountered the individual engaged in a series of actions that had immediate strategic implications for the Brotherhood, including the recovery of pre-war technology, interference with NCR supply lines, and direct engagement with hostile factions that had previously posed a persistent threat to Hidden Valley's security, and these encounters were meticulously documented in field reports that highlighted not only the Courier's combat proficiency, but also the ability to navigate complex political environments, negotiate with multiple parties, and exercise judgment independent of the Brotherhood's doctrine, qualities that immediately marked them as both an asset and a potential source of destabilization within the chapter. Elder McNamara, recognizing the Courier's unique capabilities, sought to evaluate the potential for cooperation, balancing the risks of exposure and compromise against the possible benefits of aligning with an individual who could assist in securing resources, gathering intelligence, and mediating conflicts that the diminished Brotherhood could not address alone, and he authorized limited contact, carefully structured reconnaissance, and controlled exchanges of information, all while maintaining the secrecy and defensive posture that had preserved the chapter since the retreat from HELIOS One, a strategy that reflected both prudence and an acknowledgement that traditional methods of expansion, engagement, and technological acquisition were insufficient in the evolving strategic landscape of the Mojave. Hardin, by contrast, viewed the Courier through a lens of opportunity and strategic ambition, perceiving the individual not merely as an independent operative, but as a potential ally whose alignment could enable the chapter to undertake bolder operations, reclaim lost honor, and assert technological dominance over both NCR forces and hostile wasteland factions. a perspective that led him to advocate for a more aggressive engagement, encouraging missions, demonstrations of power, and the acquisition of strategic assets in coordination with the Courier, while simultaneously positioning himself as the central figure capable of directing such actions, consolidating influence among paladins who shared his belief in proactive doctrine, and framing the Courier as a catalyst for the realization of a vision in which the Brotherhood reasserted its relevance in the Mojave. The interactions between the Courier and the Mojave Brotherhood were characterized by negotiation, observation, and careful assessment, as both Elder McNamara and Hardin sought to determine the Courier's motives, capabilities, and potential for loyalty, using controlled assignments, limited access to pre-war technology, and guided reconnaissance missions as means to evaluate whether alignment with the individual could serve the chapter's long-term objectives without compromising its secrecy, cohesion, or doctrinal purity. And this process highlighted the delicate balance between pragmatism and ideology that defines Brotherhood decision-making in extreme conditions, where the survival of the chapter is inseparable from the preservation of knowledge, discipline, and hierarchical authority. The Courier's role quickly evolved from a peripheral presence to a central factor in the chapter's operational calculus, as their actions began to influence patrol strategies, resource allocation, and even internal political dynamics. Reports of successful missions, acquisition of critical pre-war components, and direct interventions in NCR operations forced Elder McNamara to reconsider previously cautious approaches, balancing the potential benefits against the inherent risks of empowering an outsider, while Hardin interpreted the Courier's effectiveness as validation of his own philosophy, leveraging these developments to expand influence, justify preemptive operations, and promote loyal paladins within the chapter, creating a subtle yet profound tension in which the individual's decisions carried consequences far beyond immediate tactical outcomes. The philosophical implications of contact with the Courier were equally significant, as the Brotherhood's rigid doctrinal framework was challenged by the presence of an autonomous actor whose skill, judgment, and initiative could not be fully controlled, prompting debates among senior leadership regarding the boundaries of obedience, the application of doctrine in fluid circumstances, and the extent to which survival necessitated adaptation versus strict adherence to traditional methods, a dialogue that occurred in both formal council meetings and informal mentorship discussions, influencing not only strategy, but the cultural evolution of the chapter, as younger paladins observed the interplay between innovation, risk, and hierarchical authority, and began to integrate these lessons into their own understanding of Brotherhood identity. Contact with the Courier also had immediate operational consequences, as the individual facilitated access to critical resources, mediated potential conflicts with external factions, and contributed to the stabilization of supply chains, while simultaneously creating new challenges in terms of secrecy, command cohesion, and the allocation of sensitive technology. Field reports meticulously recorded these interventions, highlighting both the Courier's effectiveness and the potential vulnerabilities introduced by reliance on an independent agent, and these reports became a central component of strategic deliberations, influencing the balance of power between Hardin and McNamara, the prioritization of patrol objectives, and the timing of defensive or offensive measures in response to NCR movements. The dynamic between the Courier and the Mojave Brotherhood thus represents a turning point not only in the chapter's immediate tactical posture, but also in its broader trajectory, illustrating the complex interplay between external agency, internal factionalism, doctrinal adherence, and the practical necessities of survival in a hostile environment. The decisions made during this period, whether to cultivate cooperation, limit access, or leverage the Courier's capabilities for strategic advantage, have ramifications for the potential future paths of the chapter, including the Hardin takeover, McNamara-led diplomacy, or continued defensive isolation, and each choice reinforces the principle that even a highly disciplined, technologically advanced organization like the Brotherhood is profoundly affected by the introduction of a single, capable actor whose actions cannot be entirely predicted or controlled. Ultimately, the Courier's involvement underscores a fundamental aspect of Brotherhood philosophy and operational reality: survival, influence, and the preservation of pre-war knowledge require not only discipline, technological mastery, and doctrinal fidelity, but also the ability to recognize, evaluate, and, when prudent, integrate external factors into decision-making, balancing the rigid structures of command with the fluid dynamics of the wasteland. And in doing so, the Mojave Brotherhood demonstrates both the resilience and the fragility of an organization that is simultaneously rooted in tradition, dependent on technology, and continuously tested by the unpredictable realities of the post-apocalyptic world, making the Courier not merely a visitor or ally but a defining variable in the chapter's ongoing struggle to survive, adapt, and retain relevance in the Mojave wasteland. The Hardin takeover path within the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel represents one of the most pivotal and contentious periods in the chapter's history, a scenario that unfolds when Head Paladin Hardin consolidates power in opposition to Elder McNamara's cautious leadership, asserting an aggressive, militaristic vision of the Brotherhood's role in the Mojave wasteland that emphasizes doctrinal purity, technological dominance, and the proactive elimination of both external threats and internal dissent. And this path, while contingent on the involvement of the Courier and the chapter's response to NCR operations, provides a window into the consequences of ideological rigidity and the ways in which internal politics, personal ambition, and survival imperatives intersect to shape the trajectory of a fractured faction. The initial stages of the Hardin takeover are marked by a subtle but deliberate reorganization of command structures within Hidden Valley, with Hardin leveraging his status as Head Paladin, his reputation for field competence, and the loyalty of a growing faction of paladins to assert operational authority, reassign patrols, and direct strategic initiatives without formal endorsement from the Elder, a process that gradually shifts the balance of power and undermines McNamara's influence, creating an environment in which the formal hierarchy remains nominal while actual operational control becomes concentrated in Hardin's hands, a phenomenon that reflects both the pragmatic realities of survival under stress and the ideological appeal of his assertive approach. This internal coup is facilitated by Hardin's deliberate cultivation of loyal supporters, including young and ambitious paladins, key scribes whose technical expertise aligns with his operational philosophy, and veteran knights who, embittered by the failures of HELIOS One and inspired by his vision of military resurgence, see in Hardin a path toward restoring honor, reclaiming territory, and reasserting technological authority over the Mojave, a coalition that provides both legitimacy and capability for the emergent leadership, while marginalizing moderates who remain aligned with McNamara's cautious approach. Hardin's strategy emphasizes both overt and covert measures, ranging from the redistribution of critical pre-war technology to the reassignment of strategic patrols and the selective control of intelligence, all designed to demonstrate competence, reinforce loyalty, and signal to both supporters and potential adversaries that his authority is effective and consequential, and these actions are carefully calibrated to avoid immediate confrontation with the Elder or open schism until sufficient power has been consolidated, reflecting a combination of tactical calculation, psychological acumen, and doctrinal justification that positions Hardin as both a decisive leader and an embodiment of the Brotherhood's aggressive martial traditions. As the consolidation of power progresses, the Hardin takeover path becomes increasingly characterized by the use of purges, whether administrative, ideological, or operational, targeting members of the chapter who resist his authority, question his decisions, or adhere too closely to McNamara's philosophy. And these purges, though often framed in terms of loyalty, discipline, or doctrinal compliance, function to eliminate potential centers of opposition, enforce conformity, and reinforce the perception that the chapter's survival and future prosperity depend upon a singular, uncompromising vision of technological and military supremacy, a vision that resonates with many paladins whose faith in cautious leadership has been shaken by repeated setbacks and isolation in the Mojave. The takeover also includes an expansionist component, in which Hardin authorizes patrols, resource-gathering missions, and preemptive strikes that extend the Brotherhood's operational reach beyond Hidden Valley, often targeting NCR convoys, raider encampments, or abandoned pre-war facilities that can be appropriated for the chapter's technological and strategic advantage, a policy that reflects both the ideological imperative to safeguard and control advanced technology and the practical need to assert relevance and strength in a region increasingly dominated by external powers. And this military expansionism serves a dual purpose: consolidating Hardin's authority internally by demonstrating effectiveness and initiative, and signaling externally that the Brotherhood, despite prior setbacks, remains a formidable force capable of influencing the strategic calculus of both the NCR and rival factions. In parallel with these measures, Hardin leverages the Courier's involvement to extend the chapter's capabilities, utilizing the individual's mobility, connections, and ability to operate independently to secure strategic assets, gather intelligence, and disrupt adversaries in ways that the diminished Brotherhood could not accomplish alone. A collaboration that magnifies Hardin's influence, reinforces his operational philosophy, and deepens the divide between his faction and those loyal to McNamara, illustrating the pivotal role that external agents play in the internal evolution of the Mojave Brotherhood, and highlighting the contingent nature of factional ascendancy in a post-apocalyptic environment where skill, initiative, and strategic alignment can redefine hierarchies overnight. The Hardin takeover path also fundamentally reshapes the culture of the Mojave chapter, emphasizing doctrinal orthodoxy, strict obedience, and a proactive approach to conflict, a shift that affects training, operational planning, and resource prioritization, as paladins are increasingly judged not merely by technical proficiency or survival skill, but by their willingness to embrace a vision of the Brotherhood in which dominance, discipline, and the strategic use of technology are inseparable from authority and survival. Under Hardin's leadership, this culture reinforces cohesion among supporters while marginalizing dissenters, creating both stability and latent tension, as the success of the chapter now depends on the alignment of ideology, capability, and loyalty, rather than mere hierarchical appointment or survival instinct alone. The broader strategic implications of the Hardin takeover, include the potential for more aggressive engagement with the NCR, proactive seizure of key pre-war assets, and the assertion of technological control over contested territories, a posture that significantly increases both the chapter's visibility and its operational risk, reflecting a calculated willingness to trade security for influence, initiative, and the restoration of perceived honor, and highlighting the tension inherent in a leadership philosophy that prioritizes assertive action over cautious preservation, even in a context where the loss of a single key engagement could have catastrophic consequences for the Mojave Brotherhood's survival. The psychological and social dynamics of the takeover are equally profound, as paladins and scribes are compelled to navigate shifting loyalties, adapt to new command structures, and internalize a narrative in which Hardin's ascendancy represents both the restoration of the Brotherhood's martial tradition and the legitimization of proactive, sometimes ruthless, measures to ensure survival, creating an environment in which personal initiative, loyalty, and ideological alignment are continually evaluated, rewarded, or penalized, and where the cohesion of the chapter is constantly tested by the interplay of ambition, belief, and operational necessity. Ultimately, the Hardin takeover path exemplifies the interplay between ideology, leadership, and survival in a post-apocalyptic faction, illustrating how internal politics, external threats, and doctrinal interpretation converge to define both the short-term operational behavior and the long-term strategic trajectory of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, and revealing that in an organization as hierarchical, technologically dependent, and ideologically rigid as the Brotherhood, the consolidation of power through rebellion, purges, and military expansionism can both preserve the faction in a hostile environment and simultaneously sow the seeds of internal conflict, demonstrating that the choices made during this period have enduring consequences for the chapter's identity, operational philosophy, and capacity to navigate the complex and dangerous landscape of the Mojave wasteland. The McNamara reform path within the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel represents an alternative trajectory in which Elder McNamara's cautious, strategic, and preservation-oriented philosophy prevails, emphasizing survival, internal stability, and measured engagement with external powers, a scenario that contrasts sharply with the militaristic ambitions of Head Paladin Hardin and highlights the Brotherhood's capacity for internal debate, adaptive strategy, and nuanced diplomacy in response to the complex political and environmental challenges of the Mojave wasteland, as the Elder's approach prioritizes maintaining cohesion, protecting technological assets, and leveraging diplomacy over overt aggression, reflecting a recognition that survival in the post-apocalyptic Mojave requires careful balance between doctrinal fidelity, operational prudence, and the pragmatic realities imposed by the new California Republic, raider factions, and the harsh desert environment. Following the retreat from HELIOS One, McNamara's leadership in the reform path is defined by meticulous reorganization of the Hidden Valley Bunker, where operational routines, resource management, and the allocation of technical expertise are structured to preserve both material and human assets, ensuring that every paladin, knight, and scribe operates in a coordinated manner while minimizing exposure to external threats, and that the chapter's limited numbers are utilized efficiently to maintain security, surveillance, and technological capability. This organizational restructuring emphasizes defensive readiness, redundancy in critical systems, and a focus on long-term sustainability rather than immediate territorial expansion, illustrating the Elder's belief that the Brotherhood's mission in the Mojave cannot be achieved through rash aggression, but through disciplined, methodical stewardship of resources and strategic patience. Central to the McNamara reform path is the cultivation of controlled interactions with the Courier, whose presence in the Mojave represents both a potential opportunity and a risk, requiring careful management, assessment, and guidance to ensure alignment with the chapter's objectives. Rather than utilizing the Courier as a tool for aggressive expansion, McNamara seeks to evaluate their abilities, integrate their efforts into defensive and intelligence-gathering operations, and, where possible, mediate their engagement with external factions to reinforce stability and prevent unnecessary conflict, a process that underscores the Elder's emphasis on diplomacy, controlled influence, and the management of variables beyond the chapter's immediate control. McNamara's approach to internal politics under the reform path is characterized by the maintenance of hierarchical order, while accommodating a degree of initiative among paladins and scribes, balancing the need for obedience with the recognition that field operatives require discretion and judgment in a fluid environment, and this careful delegation ensures that operational flexibility is maintained without compromising the Elder's strategic oversight or the chapter's doctrinal integrity, in contrast to Hardin's takeover path, which relies on aggressive purges and centralization of authority. The reform path seeks to cultivate loyalty through mentorship, measured discipline, and a shared sense of purpose, reinforcing cohesion while minimizing the risk of internal schism or rebellion. Operational priorities under McNamara's reformist leadership emphasize surveillance, intelligence gathering, and defensive security, with patrols carefully planned to monitor NCR movements, raider activity, and environmental hazards while minimizing exposure and conserving resources, and all field activities are meticulously documented by scribes to inform strategic decision-making and ensure that lessons learned are preserved for both current and future generations. This approach reflects the Elder's belief that knowledge, prudence, and foresight are essential to maintaining the chapter's viability in a hostile, resource-limited, and politically contested environment, and that careful planning outweighs the immediate advantages of bold or provocative action. Diplomacy forms another cornerstone of the reform path, with McNamara seeking avenues for controlled engagement with the NCR and other Mojave factions to reduce hostilities, secure resources, and create conditions for long-term coexistence without compromising the Brotherhood's core mission or technological secrecy. These efforts include the negotiation of non-interference agreements, monitoring of border activity, and the careful calibration of information shared with external actors, reflecting an understanding that survival and influence are not achieved solely through force, but through strategic management of relationships, perception, and timing, and that every interaction must be weighed for its potential impact on both immediate security and long-term objectives. The cultural implications of the reform path are profound, as paladins and scribes internalize a doctrine that prioritizes restraint, procedural fidelity, and long-term strategic thinking over impulsive displays of martial prowess, fostering a climate in which operational discipline, intellectual rigor, and adherence to protocol are elevated above the pursuit of glory or immediate tactical advantage, and where success is measured not solely by battlefield outcomes but by the chapter's continued stability, cohesion, and capacity to safeguard its technological and ideological assets. McNamara's emphasis on education, mentorship, and doctrinal reinforcement ensures that younger recruits and mid-ranking paladins develop a comprehensive understanding of both practical and philosophical aspects of Brotherhood service, cultivating a cadre of officers capable of executing defensive, intelligence, and technological preservation operations with precision, while also instilling an appreciation for strategic patience, ethical responsibility, and the broader consequences of engagement with hostile forces. A pedagogical approach that strengthens the chapter's institutional continuity and resilience even under conditions of limited manpower and external threat. Under the reform path, the Elder also implements careful internal monitoring and dispute resolution mechanisms, designed to manage potential factional tensions and to prevent the emergence of Hardin-style insubordination or rogue initiative, using a combination of mentorship, advisory councils, and controlled operational oversight to ensure that disagreements are addressed through structured channels rather than through rebellion or purges, reinforcing the principle that internal cohesion is paramount for survival and that loyalty to the Elder's guidance is inseparable from the chapter's continued viability. McNamara's leadership further emphasizes technological stewardship, with scribes and paladins working in close coordination to maintain, repair, and catalog pre-war equipment, energy weapons, and power armor, while adhering to strict security protocols, ensuring that the chapter's assets remain both functional and secure, a task made more urgent by the Mojave's environmental hazards, the presence of scavengers and raiders, and the strategic interests of the NCR, and reflecting the Elder's belief that control over technology is inseparable from the chapter's ability to survive, project influence, and uphold its doctrinal mission. The reform path also anticipates future contingencies, incorporating long-term strategic planning, scenario-based exercises, and the cultivation of relationships that may provide leverage, intelligence, or resource access in the event of NCR expansion, environmental shifts, or internal crises, demonstrating the Elder's holistic approach to leadership, in which operational readiness, political acumen, doctrinal fidelity, and ethical stewardship are integrated into a single framework guiding all aspects of chapter activity. Ultimately, the McNamara reform path illustrates the ways in which the Mojave Brotherhood can maintain survival, cohesion, and influence without resorting to the overtly aggressive, faction-driven, and expansionist strategies associated with Hardin, providing a canonical framework in which caution, diplomacy, and controlled adaptation allow the chapter to navigate the perilous Mojave environment, while preserving its technological, ideological, and human capital, and demonstrating that in a post-apocalyptic world, leadership grounded in foresight, balance, and doctrinal integrity can achieve objectives of preservation and influence in ways that brute force alone cannot, ensuring the Brotherhood's continued presence, resilience, and potential for cautious reassertion of authority in the Mojave wasteland. The Second Battle of Hoover Dam represents the culminating moment of strategic and operational tension for the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel, where the consequences of prior leadership decisions, factional alignments, and external pressures converge into a singular, decisive conflict that tests the chapter's doctrine, loyalty, and technological resources, and the Brotherhood's role in this engagement varies significantly depending on the choices made by the Courier. The internal balance of power between Elder McNamara and Head Paladin Hardin, and the shifting strategic landscape imposed by the new California Republic and Caesar's Legion. Yet regardless of the specific canonical path, the conflict underscores the chapter's enduring commitment to the preservation of pre-war knowledge, the execution of tactical operations in a hostile environment, and the philosophical tension between aggressive assertion and cautious survival that has defined the Mojave Brotherhood since its retreat from HELIOS One. In the months leading up to the Second Battle, Brotherhood operatives conducted extensive reconnaissance and intelligence-gathering missions to monitor NCR and Legion troop movements, evaluate supply lines, and assess the tactical viability of offensive, defensive, or supportive operations, a process that involved the coordination of Hidden Valley patrols, scribes' technical assessments of weaponry and armor, and Paladin-led field exercises, all designed to optimize the chapter's effectiveness while preserving manpower and technological assets. These preparations reflected the Elders' cautious approach, which prioritized calculated engagement over impetuous confrontation, and Hardin's factional emphasis on initiative and martial dominance, which often advocated for proactive strikes and visible demonstrations of power, creating an operational tension that would manifest decisively as the battle unfolded. Depending on the factional alignment within the chapter, Brotherhood forces could assume a number of roles, ranging from limited reconnaissance and support operations in which small detachments shadowed NCR units, secured critical infrastructure, or disrupted Legion supply chains, to direct participation in combat where Paladins and Knights employed energy weapons, power armor, and pre-war artillery to engage Legion forces, protect strategic positions, or assist in the defense of the dam itself, all of which required meticulous coordination, disciplined execution, and careful risk assessment, as the Brotherhood's diminished numbers meant that any losses would have an outsized impact on both operational capability and long-term survival. For McNamara-aligned chapters, the approach was characterized by strategic discretion, prioritizing intelligence collection, the safeguarding of pre-war technology, and the support of NCR objectives, without overt exposure, ensuring that the Brotherhood maintained its operational integrity while avoiding unnecessary losses. This involved the deployment of Paladins in observation roles, the use of hidden positions for defensive overwatch, and limited engagement to slow or disrupt enemy forces only when the tactical advantage was clear and risk minimized, reflecting a philosophy in which survival and technological preservation were paramount, and demonstrating the Elders' belief that the Brotherhood's influence could be exerted indirectly through careful planning and selective intervention rather than brute force. In contrast, under Hardin-aligned control, operations were marked by direct, aggressive intervention, with Paladins and Knights conducting offensive maneuvers, ambushing Legion units, seizing strategic positions, and actively engaging in the defense of the dam, often at considerable personal risk, as the factions sought to assert the Brotherhood's relevance, demonstrate martial superiority, and recover both honor and influence lost during the retreat from HELIOS One. These operations, while potentially yielding immediate tactical gains, carried significant risk, including attrition, exposure of technological assets, and potential conflict with the NCR, illustrating the operational consequences of an expansionist, martial doctrine in a highly contested environment. Field coordination during the battle relied heavily on scribes' technical expertise, including the repair and maintenance of energy weapons, calibration of power armor systems, and analysis of pre-war munitions, ensuring that the chapter's limited technological advantages were optimized and operational failures minimized, a critical factor given the intensity of engagement and the high stakes of combat where errors could result in both mission failure and catastrophic personnel losses. This integration of martial and technical expertise reflects the Brotherhood's organizational philosophy, in which the effectiveness of combat units is inseparable from the precision, reliability, and doctrinal application of pre-war technology. Beyond tactical considerations, the battle also tested the Brotherhood's command structure and internal cohesion, as paladins and knights were required to operate under extreme stress. With communication limited by terrain, environmental hazards, and the unpredictability of enemy action, all while navigating factional tension between McNamara's caution and Hardin's assertiveness. The manner in which orders were interpreted, executed, or adapted in real time demonstrated both the resilience and potential fragility of the chapter's hierarchical system, and highlighted the enduring influence of leadership philosophy on operational effectiveness in high-stakes environments. The strategic outcome of Brotherhood operations at Hoover Dam, whether contributing to NCR success, engaging directly with Legion forces, or maintaining defensive and intelligence-gathering positions, had immediate and long-term implications for the Mojave chapter, influencing resource allocation, morale, territorial control, and political influence, as well as the internal balance of power between factions loyal to McNamara or Hardin. Casualties, equipment losses, and technological attrition all factored into subsequent decisions regarding patrol strategy, defensive preparations, and doctrinal adherence, reinforcing the principle that operational effectiveness in the Mojave is inseparable from careful planning, disciplined execution, and the philosophical underpinnings of leadership. Additionally, Brotherhood participation in the battle, whether covert or direct, had profound implications for the organization's identity, demonstrating both the adaptability and limitations of a faction that is ideologically rigid, technologically dependent, and numerically diminished, and serving as a crucible in which questions of loyalty, strategy, and the ethical use of advanced technology were tested under conditions of extreme stress. These experiences would shape subsequent chapter policies, leadership dynamics, and the interpretation of doctrine for years to come, providing both cautionary lessons and opportunities for doctrinal evolution. The battle also reinforced the essential interplay between survival, technological preservation, and tactical decision-making, as paladins and scribes alike confronted situations in which equipment malfunction, environmental hazards, or unpredictable enemy action could determine the outcome of engagements, emphasizing the critical role of foresight, discipline, and the careful integration of intelligence into operational planning, and underscoring the broader lesson that the Brotherhood's mission extends beyond immediate battlefield success to the long-term maintenance of cohesion, doctrine, and technological assets in a post-apocalyptic theater. Ultimately, Brotherhood operations during the Second Battle of Hoover Dam exemplify the complex interrelation of leadership, philosophy, factional alignment, technological stewardship, and tactical execution, revealing that the chapter's actions, whether passive, supportive, or aggressively interventionist, are informed by decades of experience, ideological adherence, and the enduring imperative to balance survival with influence in the Mojave wasteland, and that the consequences of these operations resonate far beyond the battlefield, shaping the trajectory of the Mojave Brotherhood in both tangible and doctrinal terms, and reinforcing the principle that even in the crucible of war, the preservation of knowledge, cohesion, and disciplined action remains the defining measure of the chapter's enduring relevance and survival. The legacy of the Mojave Brotherhood of Steel is a testament to both resilience and fragility, reflecting a chapter that has endured catastrophic losses, internal factional struggles, and the relentless pressures of the Mojave wasteland while remaining committed to the preservation of pre-war technology, doctrinal fidelity, and the hierarchical values that define the Brotherhood as an institution. And understanding this legacy requires a holistic consideration of survival strategies, leadership dynamics, cultural adaptation, and the interplay between external forces and internal philosophical choices that have determined the chapter's trajectory from its emergence after the NCR Brotherhood schism to its potential futures under either Hardin or McNamara. The Mojave chapter's endurance is contingent upon its ability to navigate a post-apocalyptic environment where material scarcity, hostile factions, environmental hazards, and ideological rigidity intersect in ways that test not only operational capacity, but also the cohesion of belief systems, the interpretation of doctrine, and the capacity for strategic foresight, creating a legacy that is simultaneously defined by continuity, adaptation, and the persistent threat of extinction. The survival of the chapter in the immediate aftermath of HELIOS One, through retreat into Hidden Valley and consolidation under Elder McNamara or the rise of Hardin, exemplifies the complex interplay between leadership, philosophy, and organizational continuity, highlighting how survival strategies, whether cautious and diplomatically oriented or aggressive and militarily expansionist, fundamentally shape the character, operational ethos, and long-term prospects of the Mojave Brotherhood, and demonstrating that leadership choices reverberate through every layer of the organization, influencing Paladin's field conduct, Scribe's technological stewardship, patrol routines, and the ethical framework within which decisions are made. Central to the chapter's legacy is its unwavering commitment to the preservation and ethical management of pre-war technology, an objective that transcends immediate tactical considerations and informs every aspect of training, operational planning, and internal governance. This technological stewardship serves as both a practical necessity, ensuring the functionality of power armor, energy weapons, and critical systems, and as a philosophical anchor, reinforcing the Brotherhood's identity and purpose, particularly in a Mojave landscape dominated by the expanding influence of the new California Republic, the aggressive incursions of Caesar's Legion, and the chaotic activities of raider factions, where control over advanced technology represents both survival and authority. The internal culture of the Mojave chapter, shaped by its history of retreat, adaptation, and factional conflict, is another defining element of its legacy, encompassing the values, rituals, hierarchies, and operational norms that guide every member from initiate to elder. These cultural norms, emphasizing discipline, loyalty, and doctrinal obedience, provide cohesion in an environment where external pressures could otherwise fracture the organization, while simultaneously creating latent tensions when ideological differences, generational perspectives, or personal ambitions clash with institutional priorities, a dynamic most vividly illustrated by the divergent paths of Hardin and McNamara and their respective visions for the chapter's future. The potential for extinction, a recurring theme in the Mojave Brotherhood's narrative, underscores the fragility inherent in a technologically dependent, numerically constrained, and politically isolated faction, highlighting how battlefield losses, attrition, resource scarcity, and factional disunity can threaten organizational survival even in the presence of disciplined, skilled personnel. This ever-present risk informs strategic decision-making, instills a conservative approach to resource management, and reinforces the philosophical premise that the preservation of knowledge, hierarchy, and doctrine must be prioritized over short-term gains or opportunistic engagement, as any deviation can imperil the very continuity of the chapter. Conversely, the potential for rebirth, either through the Hardin takeover or McNamara's reformist diplomacy, reflects the adaptive capacity of the Mojave Brotherhood, demonstrating that ideological clarity, disciplined leadership, strategic alliances, and careful utilization of assets, including the intervention of external agents such as the Courier, can revitalize the chapter, restore influence in the Mojave, and establish conditions for renewed operational relevance, a process that integrates lessons from past defeats, institutional memory preserved by scribes, and the experience of paladins to create a foundation for recovery and sustainable governance, emphasizing the Brotherhood's capacity for resilience in both material and ideological terms. The chapter's legacy is further shaped by its role in regional power dynamics, as the Mojave Brotherhood's actions, whether in reconnaissance, skirmishes, strategic engagements, or subtle diplomacy, have measurable impacts on NCR operations, Legion incursions, and the behavior of independent wasteland factions. Even in scenarios of minimal engagement, the presence of Hidden Valley, its technological reserves, and disciplined patrols function as a stabilizing factor, influencing the tactical calculus of all actors in the Mojave and reinforcing the perception that the Brotherhood remains a consequential force, capable of shaping outcomes despite reduced manpower and isolation, and demonstrating the enduring significance of strategic presence alongside combat capability. The doctrinal and philosophical dimensions of the chapter's legacy are inseparable from its operational history, as every decision regarding technology use, leadership selection, patrol priorities, and engagement with external actors serves to reinforce or challenge the principles that have historically defined Brotherhood identity, including the sanctity of pre-war knowledge, the necessity of hierarchical obedience, and the moral imperative to prevent technological misuse. These principles, transmitted through training, mentorship, and internal documentation, create continuity across generations of members and provide a framework for ethical and operational consistency, ensuring that the Mojave Brotherhood's identity persists even in the face of environmental, military, and political disruption. Ultimately, the legacy of the Mojave chapter is one of complex interplay between survival, extinction, and rebirth, reflecting an organization that has endured catastrophic defeats, adapted to environmental and political pressures, navigated factional tensions, and maintained an unwavering commitment to technological preservation and doctrinal fidelity, a legacy that is tangible in its operational achievements, its cultural cohesion, and its capacity to influence regional dynamics, and conceptual in its ethical, philosophical, and ideological continuity. This duality underscores the chapter's significance within the broader Fallout universe, illustrating that the measure of the Brotherhood's enduring impact is not merely battlefield success or territorial control, but the ability to sustain identity, values, and mission across generations, despite the relentless challenges imposed by a post-apocalyptic world, and that the Mojave Brotherhood's ultimate fate, whether survival, extinction, or rebirth, is both a reflection of its past and a determinant of its ongoing relevance in the Mojave wasteland.